Today, on episode 17 of the Fit Stoic podcast, never ruminate on the loss. We're going to look at what to do when we fail, how to deal with stumbling along our path, and a really useful definition of resilience. All right, welcome to the show. This is Corey. Today is chapter 11 of the Gymchiridion, entitled, Never Ruminate on the Loss. Begin quote. Never ruminate on the loss. If it's beyond your choice, it was never truly yours. You can never truly possess anything. Everything is temporary. Enjoy what you have as you can. And when it is no longer at your disposal, accept that with equanimity. End quote. So one of the real challenges in life is when we have something and then we lose it. And it is human nature to actually be more disturbed by losing something that we already have as opposed to gaining something that we don't have. What this means is that from the research, we are more likely to do our best to not lose $5 instead of doing our best to gain or earn, we'll say, $10. So learning how to deal with loss is a fundamental skill and one that you really want to work on. The thing about Stoicism and Stoic strength is that the essence of who we are is choice. So once again, as it always does, it comes down to the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us and within our power, and some things are not up to us and beyond our power. What is up to us is our choice, what we can choose. That's the only thing that we can really, in essence, get down to and say, yes, this is mine. No one can take it away from me. Not threat of loss, which is what we're talking about today. Not threat of death, if we go to that extreme. When we can keep that in mind, then the loss of externals becomes much, much easier to handle. It was never truly ours. We cannot possess anything with any amount of absolute control. We can do our best. There are laws in place. There are property rights, because even if you have every right in the world to maintain your possession of something, in the eyes of the law, we'll say, someone could still come along and steal it or damage it beyond repair. And you have no recourse. They get away scot-free, whatever it is, right? And then you are left with, there is the loss of it. There's the experience of that. And that's what we have to deal with. Now, the title of this chapter is Never Ruminate on the Loss. When we can really grab onto and accept that we do not possess anything, then anything that we do own at the moment or have at our disposal, we can hold it a little less tightly, right? It's almost as if we're renting it instead. Sure, we have it and we expect to have it tomorrow and the day after, but something could happen. And that is a very Stoic attitude. There's that premeditatio malorum, which is, thinking about exactly these kinds of scenarios. Thinking about, well, what if I lose that possession? What if someone dies? What if someone becomes ill? What if I become ill? That kind of thing. So when we can maintain that understanding and that attitude toward what we own or what we use in the moment, everything that is external to our choice, we won't be as devastated by loss. So Epictetus, my favorite Stoic philosopher, recommended that we begin learning how to do this with a cup. So he said, start small, right? So that we can condition ourselves, we can train ourselves to get to the point where a larger loss won't devastate us. So with a favorite cup, imagine what would happen if it were to be dropped and smashed, for example. Well, now you've lost that cup. Don't let it bother you. That's basically what it means, right? Don't ruminate on it. Like just, the cup, right? By starting with smaller things, you're just imagining the experience, which is a very, very handy skill to use, is your imagination. Think not just about losing the cup, but think from that position, if that makes sense. That it's a subtle distinction, but it makes a big difference. What I mean is that you want to experience the loss. You want to make it real in your imagination so that you can actually dredge up those emotions a little bit. If you merely think as you're sitting there and you're looking, hey, I've got my favorite cup, and you set it down and it's all safe, and then you think, oh, what if it fell and it broke? Well, that's just skimming the surface of that experience, right? But if instead you close your eyes and you imagine hearing the sound of it as it hits the floor. Maybe someone in your family or a friend comments on it, like, oh, what just happened? And they come running into the room. And you make it as real as possible. Now you've created a synthetic experience that if you do it really well and you get very vivid with your imagination, the sounds, the smells, the sensations, maybe you'd feel the little broken pieces as you start to, clean up the mess. When you can get yourself to think from that state or from that attitude, now you're starting to feel it. You're inside your own mind and you're just imagining, you're creating that experience. And that is a really good way to, again, train yourself to condition that scenario to not sting as much. And then over time, you start to amp up until finally, again, the Stoics they had this advice. If you ever read the Discourses, which I highly recommend, of Epictetus, he says, then when you are kissing your child goodnight, or your wife, or your husband, realize that you are kissing a mortal, someone who could die, and to make that synthetically, again, an experience that feels real. Now, this is getting pretty heavy. If we can get to the point where death is something that is almost, like, I'm not going to say it's on par with just, dropping a cup off the table and losing your favorite cup, but when it becomes something that is, hey, this is part of life, right? We hear about other people dying. We hear about people over on the other side of the world, and we're quite removed from that. We can start to bring that a little bit closer, again, in our imagination, and then a little bit closer still. And, until, like Epictetus said, you're thinking about your own child, your own spouse, your own family. Now, this amped up quite quickly. We went from a favorite cup, or even a second favorite cup, if we really want to start a little bit easier, and went right up to the death of someone that we love, or even our own death. But for the Stoics, if the only thing that we have is our choice within our power, then all of those other possibilities is something that we cannot control. We can influence it. We can take great care to not break the cup. We can influence and take great care of the people in our lives. But they're mortal. We're mortal. When we really learn this lesson, there will be loss, and we can train for it. Then when it actually happens, we'll be able to deal with it much better than if we keep denying even the possibility, right? And that is the training. That is thinking about and imagining and having that synthetic experience, that skull practice. When you imagine something, you only need to take it as far as you can take it. No one's going to push you any further than you will push yourself, but it will take a little bit of work. We've looked at small loss, a cup. We've looked at a very large loss, someone that we love or that we cherish. So there's the failure of reaching a goal. And this again is something that we can prepare by imagining, okay, here's the goal that I want, and here is where I am. So we've got this gap. And then you can fill in all the steps in your imagination, and you can think about the obstacles. And it's not just going to be one straight shot from, well, here I am today, and then I'm just going to easily get to this point here. That's generally not how life works. There's all kinds of wrinkles and all kinds of stumbling blocks that we don't anticipate. If you imagine what you're going to do, then you can deal with it much better. Now, you don't want to take this too far and just start imagining anything like, oh, what if an asteroid hits? How am I going to get to my goal then? You want to be a little realistic. Like, what would realistically be a challenge? Maybe you don't have the knowledge. Maybe you don't have the resources. Maybe somebody else is competing with you to get to that point a little bit faster. And so there's a time constraint, that kind of stuff. So all you need to do is, again, use that synthetic experience and prepare yourself mentally so that if you fail a little bit, if you stumble, then you can pick yourself up and keep going to the point where even failing to achieve your goal, even if you absolutely are like, I really, really want this. Not to the point where you say, I need this, because if you start saying, I need to do this, I need to, get X, or I need to achieve Y, whatever it is. When you start using the word need, that will cause all kinds of stress in your life. Just make it a preference, very strong preference perhaps, but if it's a preference, then you are open to a different experience as well. And that, again, is something that the Stoics recommend. You just have preferences instead of absolute needs. We can use synthetic experience, our imagination, to prepare ourselves for small failures, big failures, stumbles along the way, loss of opportunity, of actual material possessions, of abilities, that kind of thing. And then what I mentioned right at the beginning was that there's also this really useful definition of resilience, which ties into what I've been talking about today. You can think of resilience as the ability to keep moving toward what you consider to be excellence for yourself, regardless of the setbacks, the challenges, the circumstances that hinder your progress. What makes resilience relevant? You need to know how you understand what resilience is so that you can use it, so that you can understand when you are being resilient. When I talk about Stoic strength, what I consider Stoic strength, it's the knowing of what you consider excellence for yourself, holding that as your standard, and then choosing to be consistent, to living up to that standard. And resilience then is the strength of Stoic strength. It's that ability to, regardless of the circumstances, to keep yourself striving to live up and to embody and to be consistent with that standard. If you tell yourself that you only eat donuts or junk food on a certain free day of the week, like Saturday, for example, and then you are faced with a workplace scenario. Hey, everybody, I brought donuts. And it's not your free day. You're tempted because you don't want to seem rude, right? You don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. They went to all that trouble. They are handing you a donut or the box, the open box. But you have a standard. And, you could take one and then not eat it, right? That's one way that some people deal with this. How you deal with it, you might eat half, take a bite, whatever it is. You choose how to live up to your standard. And it's what you do in the face of not living up to your standard or not being consistent with that person that you want to be. That stumble, that failure, that inconsistency. That's where the resilience comes in. What do you do when you fall? Now, the title of this chapter is Never Ruminate on the Loss. There's two things that can happen in these scenarios, right? One is that, oh, thank you. I actually don't eat donuts during the week, only on Saturdays. But thank you. I really appreciate it. You lived up to your standard. You were consistent. That's one way. There's also halfway into a donut, you think, oh, yeah, right. I wasn't supposed to do this. That's a loss. It's not a material loss, but it's a loss in your living up to your standard, your own, you judge yourself. You feel a little guilty. You feel a little bit maybe of shame, right? You start to beat yourself up a little bit. That is the rumination on the loss of something. And that's a very specific instance of not maintaining, as I put it, your Stoic strength. I believe that it is a more useful skill to know how to fail than it is to know how to succeed. What I'm saying is that the consequences of not knowing how to fail or deal with loss, or how you deal with not achieving a certain standard, the consequences of not handling failure and setbacks and challenges well far outweigh the consequences of succeeding, because it happens more often. We're more aware of it. We pay attention to it. As I was saying at the beginning here, it's human nature to be more invested in not losing than it is to invest ourselves in actually progressing and winning, if I use those words. So really do your best to learn to be resilient and to never ruminate on the loss. Take your focus and your attention away from, why is this happening? How could this happen? Not that you don't want to understand it. You want to learn from your mistakes, but to not relive the mistakes over and over. That's rumination, right? It's going back to it and reliving it, going back to it and reliving it. That is not helpful. That becomes a pattern in itself. You shrink yourself a little bit. You start to pay more attention to, okay, how could I lose here? Instead of, what do I need to do to achieve what I want to achieve? And that is why never ruminate on a loss is such a vital lesson. If you would like a free PDF of the Gymchiridion, you can go to gymmanual.com. Once again, thanks for spending time with me today. If you like what you heard, please do share it with someone that you believe might like it too. Thanks for listening. This is Corey. Whatever your obstacle, operate with excellence.